Hello, it's me again, Rashad Mitchell, doing another episode tonight. I just can't stop doing it. I'm gonna read some poetry for you on this episode, the 11th episode of the Mitchell Report. I'm very gifted, poet, man. I just love doing what I do as far as writing poetry. I'm definitely going to represent tonight. 100%. Here we go. I don't eat Snickers and I'm not a big dipper. And I won't choke like an LA Clipper. Crafting a Kodak moment. So you might as well take the picture. Blessed with charisma and you can't remove the stigma. This is the world premiere. So crystal clear, listen here, my dear, so sincere, that I've always been here, in there like swimwear, without no tears for fears, back with the latest from the hiatus, so sacred, need to get buck naked, master builder, and it doesn't get any wilder, live in the light like Karen Wheeler, open the curtains, because this is Masterpiece Theater, emerging as a lyrical surgeon, on the excursion, and you can't touch this like I was a virgin. The yearning as the most determined. I don't get lucky. I get fried like chicken from Kentucky because I don't drink any bourbon. Flowing like two kings in a cipher. You will pay the piper because there is none that is liver and wiser. The straits are not dire. I'm on fire and I won't retire. No need to wallow in the mire. I don't have to give more reasons like earth, wind, and fire. It doesn't get any wilder or clearer. So open the curtains, because this is Masterpiece Theater. I learned to relax in my own world, escaping from New Jersey, from Patterson, aka the Silk City, not chocolate, even though I don't eat any Hershey's. Reimburse me or have mercy. I am not a jive turkey, despite troubled waters being murky. Don't have beef with anyone, say that for beef jerky. Setting the tone as a quintessential red bone, dwelling in the uncompromised and godly zone. I got my rights, featuring the lyrical highlights, giving power to the people like the shy lights, soaring like a meteorite, bound to explode like dynamite. That's the extra bonus. You can't clone it, sharp like a machete. King's Son was the first passing lyrical one long before Fetty. Not using this as a usual diss. In the rap biz, I'm just testing you like you was taking a musical quiz. Just the learning as the point that is turning. My point of view was made clearer. Never come off weirder. I just closed the curtains. This was Masterpiece Theater. That's something that I wrote last year for Masterpiece Theater. I wrote it on my tablet, saying that's what I did, a year ago. I want to talk about also on this episode, I am a writer for the Gyroscope Media Group magazine. And I want to talk about some of the articles that I wrote, the blogs that I wrote a year ago, and currently have for this year too, as well. Now, this is going to be featured in, I'm quite sure, the February-March issue of Gyroscope magazine, Gyroscope Media Group magazine. I did a blog about the Soul Brothers Top 20. Now, it's very iconic because it was featured in Jet Magazine on April 6, 1967. Jet Magazine created a segment inside the magazine that will become iconic for years to come. The Soul Brothers Top 20 came about when the entertainment editors of Jet Magazine surveyed 25 major cities in America, where Soul Brothers and Soul Sisters were gathered together in the nightclubs, record hops, house parties, and school recreation lounges. This happened because the editors wanted what music was played at these different venues in America. The results of the survey showed the top 20 records that was most often played. In order to learn whether or not the entertainment editors and music polls that was conducted by white publications to line up with someone's thinking, Jet Magazine asked its readers to participate each week in a music record poll to select their favorite songs, artists, and record labels. They wanted the readers to write in numerical order the top 20 songs that were their favorite along with listing each song and the name of the artist, including the record label. So the debut of the Soul Brothers Top 20 Music Chart began on April 6, 1967. The number one song was Aretha Franklin's I've Never Loved a Man, and at number 20 was Vicki Anderson's Think. But the hit of the week was Think by Vicki Anderson. The artist of the week was The Supremes, followed by the album of the week was Raw Soul from James Brown. I think the Soul Brothers aspect probably came from the riots that was commonplace in the mid-60s, because Soul Brothers term would be spray painted on windows whenever there was a riot. So I might be wrong if Jet Magazine chose Soul Brothers for the music chart. Obviously, we will never know. But overall, this music chart was iconic, because if you was an avid reader of Jet Magazine during the heyday of this magazine, you always wanted to take a look at the Soul Brothers Top 20, because it was part of Urban Americana. So that was one of the blogs that I wrote. It should be in the February-March issue of Gyroscope Media Group magazine. I don't know if it's going to be there. I'm quite sure it is. But that was one of the blogs that I wrote for that issue. I'm not done. I'm going to read a lot tonight regarding my blogs that I wrote for Gyroscope Media Group magazine. Interesting stuff, historical. Now for the March issue, February-March issue, that should be included, I did one on Lorraine Hansberry. Now Lorraine Hansberry made her mark as a woman while she was on the earth for a short time. She inspired Nina Simone to make a song called Young, Gifted, and Black, which was an unfinished play. The title of the unfinished play was an inspiration. Lorraine Hansberry was the first black woman to write a play on Broadway. Her best known work, A Raisin in the Sun, the play highlighted the lives of black Americans living under racial segregation in Chicago. The play was a reality of what her family struggled against segregation, challenging a restrictive covenant and eventually provoking Supreme Court case, Hansberry versus Lee. The title of the play, Raisin in the Sun, came from a poem from Langston Hughes. Overall, Lorraine Hansberry was a trailblazer of a woman who inspired others at such a young age, because she died at the age of 34 of cancer. On behalf of GMG Magazine, salute to the four women who represented womanhood. Now, the next woman that I wrote about in the blog for Gyroscope Media Group magazine was about Nina Simone. Now, Nina Simone was the high priestess of soul. Simone had the bearing and stage presence by playing the piano. Simone used her standard in music, but for civil rights movements anthems like Mississippi, GD in 1964, I ain't gonna say the curse word, I don't curse. The song made a statement, and the song wasn't played in certain states in the South because there was a boycott against the song. The other major contribution to her career was collaborating with Weldon Irvin to use Lorraine Hansberry's unfinished play, Young, Gifted, and Black, into another anthem song for Nina Simone. The song was recorded. The song was recorded in 1969. The result of the song was a top 10 hit. Overall, Simone was not to stay true to her commitment to spread. Beg your pardon. Simone stayed true to her commitment to spread her message of consciousness to the masses. Next lady that I want to represent for the women was Abbey Lincoln. Abbey Lincoln was an American jazz vocalist, songwriter, and actress who wrote and performed her own compositions. She was a civil rights advocate during the 60s. In 1960, Lincoln sung on Max Roach's landmark civil rights theme recording, We Insist. Lincoln lyrics were often connected to the civil rights movement in America. As an actress, she starred in an independent film called Nothing But a Man in 1964, along with Ivan Dixon. The film was one of the most sensitive movies about black life ever made in American history. The next one was Miriam Makeba. Now, I wrote these blogs because it was in honor of National Women's Month, which is in March, which is next month. So I wanted to salute 4 women that deserve to do justice. Miriam Makeba was an African American freedom fighter and a civil rights activist. In the 1960s, she was the first artist from Africa to popularize African music around the world. As a singer, she made her mark in 1957 when she recorded the song Pata Pata, which was released in 1967. Miriam Makeba campaigned against the South African system of apartheid. Now, this is near to my heart because my father attended South Carolina State. Now, this month, on February the 8th of 1968, something happened on the college campus of South Carolina State. Orangeburg Massacre is what led to this. Now, there was a protest against a segregated bowling alley on February 8th, 1968, where blacks were not allowed public access to the place, which was the bowling alley. So students from South Carolina State University had a protest. The origins of the protest harkens back to a year earlier, during the fall of 1967, where black community leaders urged the owner of the bowling alley, who was Harry K. Floyd, to allow blacks access to the All-Star bowling alley. But Floyd refused to allow blacks inside the bowling alley, which resulted in a myriad of protests that began the following year of 1968. On February the 5th, 1968, the student protests began in earnest when a group of students from South Carolina State entered peacefully inside the bowling alley. But Floyd wanted the students out. The next night, more students returned to the bowling alley, led by John Stroman, but this time policemen were waiting for them, which led to the students being arrested. After the arrest, more students continued to show up by breaking a window of bowling alley. Then chaos broke loose, and the police began beating the students with billy clubs. During that night, 8 students were sent to the hospital. The couple of days there was more tension escalated in Orangeburg. Students demanded integration and anti-discrimination in the community. Governor Robert McNair felt that Black Power advocates were running amok. Over the next 2 days, 200 students protesters gathered on the campus of South Carolina State to continue the demonstration against the segregated bowling alley. On the night of February 8, 1968, There were students who started a bonfire in the front of college campus, but the police and firemen tried to put out the fire, and one of the officers were hit with an object. Around 10:30, about 9 patrolmen began shooting into the crowd of 150 protesters. 8 of the officers fired carbines, shotguns, and revolvers. That lasted 10 to 15 seconds. 28 people were injured in the shooting, and most were shot in the back as they were running away. There were 3 men killed, which was Delano Middleton, Henry Smith, and Samuel Hammonds. The federal government pressed charges against the officers, but to no avail, because they were acquitted, despite 36 witnesses knowing that there was no gunfire from the students, and there were none carrying guns. The aftermath of this tragedy was that this was the first major incident on a college campus in the United States, but the media coverage was very scarce. But Jump magazine was able to write stories about the tragedy, but this incident preceded Kent State in 1970, or what took place at Jackson State the same year. This massacre occurred at nighttime. Maybe that's the reason why the media coverage wasn't that what it should have been. But this was one of the most underrated civil rights protests in the history of civil rights. This incident is near and dear to my heart because my late father attended South Carolina State and graduated in 1970. So he was on campus when this incident occurred, but he never told the exact story about where he was at the moment the shots were fired. I don't know how close he was to the 3 men who were killed, but thank God my father wasn't killed, because he was able to survive that ordeal without injury while others were injured or killed. My father, may he rest in peace, was part of history in America, because the college campus of South Carolina State for the first time saw a shooting of people who were standing up for integration of a bowling alley 4 years after the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. Overall, this story had to be told, because whoever reads this blog will be educated about civil rights protests that most people probably never knew about. It is almost 50 years since the Orangeburg Massacre happened. R.I.P. for Henry Smith, Samuel Hammonds, and Delano Middleton. R.I.P. to my father, Herbert McCutcheon, class of 1970. So that was one of the blogs that I wrote. It was a very long, drag-out blog. I had to do that, you know what I'm saying, just to, switch it up. Next blog that I wrote for Gyroscope Media Group magazine was about the evolution of the Afro. Now, the Afro started in the 1860s and was a similar style worn by the Circassian beauties, which was sometimes known as the moss-haired girls, who were a group of women who exhibited in sideshow attractions in America by P.T. Barnum and others. Overall, the women claimed to be from the Circassian people in the northern Caucasus region and were marketed to white audiences that captivated the exotic East as examples of the Caucasian race who kept as sexual slaves in Turkish harems. It has been argued that this portrayal of this Caucasian woman as a rescued slave during the American Civil Rights, the American Civil War, played on the racial connotations of slavery at the time, so that the distinctive hairstyle that affiliates the sideshow white Circassian with an identity. But the Afro hairstyle for black people made its transition from mimicking the styles of white society in which they live. The Afro, textured hair, was characterized by its tight kinks, was described as being kinky, coarse, cottony, nappy, and woolly. These characteristics of the Afro represent the exact opposite of the European American standard of beauty, which resulted in a negative view of kinky hair. The practice of straightening the hair became commonplace amongst blacks. The straightening of the hair process involved applying caustic substances like relaxers that contain lye, which needed to be used by an experienced hairstylist to avoid burning the scalp and hairs. During the 1890s and early 1900s, Madam C.J. Walker popularized the use of the hot comb in America. The effects of the civil rights movement led to a renewed sense of identity to the black community, resulted in a new definition of black beauty and aesthetics, which was epitomized by the Black is Beautiful movement. This movement and cultural perspective marked a return to a more natural and untreated hairstyle. The afro was also a link to West Africa and Central Africa. The afro was easier to maintain without visiting a hairstylist. During the mid-60s, the afro became more popular among blacks, especially the Black Panther Party. The hairstyle would continue in the 70s, where the afros were worn larger than ever before by Pam Grier, Angela Davis, Jimi Hendrix, and music groups like Jackson 5 and Supremes. Even magazine publications like Ebony featured articles about the afro, even questioned whether the hairstyle was on the way out in 1973. Or whatever happened to the afro in 1982. The cycle of this hairstyle has gone through its peaks and valleys, because after the afro then came the Jerry curl. So overall, the afro for blacks represented power, identity, and a purpose at the height of the mid-60s into the 70s decade. But it wouldn't have been if it wasn't for a group of Circassian women showcasing the afro-like hairstyle for a showman named P.T. Barnum. My next blog that I wrote for Gyroscope Media Group magazine came from Robert F. Williams. Now, Robert F. Williams was one of the underrated civil rights leaders in the history of civil rights. The reason is because he was a key figure in promoting the necessity of black people being involved in armed self-defense in terms of blacks arming themselves with guns to fight off the racial tensions that were high and official abuse that was rampant. Robert was known for being involved in the NAACP in Monroe, North Carolina, serving as the main leader and president of the chapter in that region during the 50s and 60s. Williams helped gain gubernatorial pardons for two boys who were black, who were convicted for molestation in the controversial kissing case of 1958, where the two boys were kissed by a white girl on the cheeks in a neighborhood game. He was successful at integrating a public library and swimming pool in Monroe, North Carolina. Williams also obtained a charter from the National Rifle Association and a rifle club. He was actively involved in defending blacks from Ku Klux Klan night riders. He used the NAACP to support freedom riders who came to Monroe in the summer of 1961. He was a rare black nationalist, especially when everyone was nonviolent and turned the other cheek. He wrote a book called Negroes with Guns in 1962 that details his experience with violent racism and his disagreement with the pacifist wing of the civil rights movement. The book was very influential on the Black Panther Party in terms of following the blueprint of self-defense that Williams established was a major inspiration according to Huey Newton. Overall, Robert F. Williams' contributions to the civil rights struggle should not be ignored, despite his tactics being different from the nonviolent tactics of Martin Luther King. His militant stance and self-defense strategy, defending local black communities from racial attacks. He even had his own radio station called Radio Free Dixie when he was forced in exile in Cuba from Monroe, North Carolina during the early to mid-60s. The broadcast lasted from 1961 to 1965, where it broadcasted music, news, and commentary from Havana. The station played soul music on the AM radio dial through the eastern United States. Radio Free Dixie was proud to present the seldom heard songs of brutal oppression and dehumanization that no American radio dared to broadcast. Robert F. Williams died in 1996. And Rosa Parks delivered the eulogy, saying that his courage and his commitment to freedom, along with the sacrifices he made and what he did, should go down in history and never be forgotten. Now, that was a blog that should be in, I guess, the February and March issue, but it is known that should be there is the 5 stair steps. Now, before the Jackson 5, the Silvers, Sister Sledge, the DeBarge family, there were the fabulous 5 stair steps, who was the first family of soul who developed the moniker due to having success on the charts for a 5-year period from the mid-60s to 1970. The group was from Chicago, formed in 1965, collaborated with Curtis Mayfield, who took the group under his wing and produced hits. The group had hits like Ooh Child, which would be the signature song that defined the group. Other hits that came from the group was Danger, She's a Stranger, You Waited Too Long, Don't Change Your Love, and World of Fantasy. Clarence Burke Jr. was the frontman and lead singer of the group, who held his own with his own singing style. He was an underrated great lead singer who had a distinctive voice. His golden voice and ready smile won fans over. Clarence was like the boy next door and every girl's dream guy. He wrote and sung songs that came from a female's perspective of love. His voice and songs were more appealing, represented the 5 stair steps as the sound of young America, especially young Black America. What made the group stand out was that they didn't sing like the Jackson 5 or represented bubblegum soul. The 5 stair steps had rich, distinctive, mature, smooth, soulful, sensual voices that complemented the songs they sung. In the mid-60s and early 70s, this group was arguably considered the baddest group around, alongside the Temptations and the Impressions. The 5 stair steps were photogenic, including being polished with a sense of elegance. The group was set apart due to the universal magnetism they exemplified in their performances and music. The rest of the group consisted of Aloy, Kenneth, James, and Dennis, who were great dancers and graceful at it, including sex appeal and spunk. Overall, the 5 stair steps represented togetherness and love. But in the annals of R&B, this group is one of the more forgotten and more slept on groups to ever make music within the R&B genre. Unfortunately, the Jackson 5 is to blame for the 5 stair steps not being remembered as one of the all-time great groups, because once they came out, they overshadowed the 5 stair steps because of Michael Jackson, who would become the king of pop. The 5 stair steps was as good, if not better, than the Jackson 5, because they were just as talented and gifted as them. They were the first family of soul and dance. Yes, there were other Black family groups that appeared on the scene at the Burks, but many didn't measure up to the success of the 5 stair steps as a family group. This group was in a class of their own due to their choreography, stylish performing, voices, and harmony. But what eluded the 5 stair steps was mega superstardom. That was about the 5 stair steps. That should be in the magazine real soon. Next one I wrote about was about a guy named Louis Lomax. Now, before Roland Martin, there was Louis Lomax, who became the first Black television journalist. He worked as a reporter for the Baltimore Afro-American and the Chicago American until 1958, when he entered television by producing documentaries at WNTA TV in New York. Lomax became more prominent on a national scale when Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes and CBS News collaborated together to do a documentary about the Black Muslims. Wallace decided to have Lomax interview Malcolm X for the documentary The Hate That Hate Produced. This was the first major exposure of the Nation of Islam. But what made Louis Lomax unique and a pioneer was the fact that despite the racial tensions of the end of the 60s, by 1964, Lomax became one of the first Black journalists on television to host a 90-minute twice a week interview format television show. The Louis Lomax Show ran on KTTV in Los Angeles from 1964 to 1968. He interviewed guests on his television program about controversial topics like the Black Panthers, the Nation of Islam, the women's movement, and the war in Vietnam. Lomax analyzed the Black Power movement from a vantage point which was rarely shared by commentators at the time. He even questioned the moderate approach taken by the leadership of the NAACP, as well as supporting the Black Americans who were rebellious in terms of embracing Black power. There was a backlash despite encouraging whites and blacks to come together, maintaining that race problems were aggravated because people knew a little about each other. Lomax received criticism from all sides. His activities and television program attracted attention from the FBI, who was looking for possible involvement in un-American activities. He was an author of various books such as 1962, The Negro Revolt, which was focused on the emerging rights and focused on the emerging civil rights movement. And Louis Lomax was a strong believer in equal rights and became a visionary and a prophet in terms of being optimistic about the future of America. And even in 1966, 50 years ago, he predicted that the election of a black president would be easily done within the next 15 to 20 years. Unfortunately, Louis Lomax wouldn't be allowed to see a black president because in 1970 he died in a single car accident in New Mexico. But in 2008, a black president was elected in the form of Barack Obama. So the vision of a black president that Lomax had to come to pass, and it did come to pass. So his vision Louis Lomax had of a black president had came to pass. So overall, Louis Lomax was a trailblazer in the world of television journalism, making it possible for future black television journalists like Gil Noble, Ed Gordon, and Roland Martin. Next blog that I wrote for the magazine was a guy named Ivan Dixon. He was an actor. He was an actor who made his mark during the 50s and the 60s, Ivan Dixon, who broke new ground in terms of bringing the problems and promise of contemporary black life, like movies like 1964, Nothing But a Man, or his role as a level-headed POW Kinchlow in the television show Hogan's Heroes. He began his acting career in the late 50s, as well as directing scores of television shows. He appeared on Broadway in 1957, The Cave Dwellers, then Raisin in the Sun, as a playwright in 1959, as the movie where he played a Nigerian student visiting the United States. Nothing But a Man represented a movie that was a pioneering effort in terms of the rare early effort to bring the lives of blacks to the big screen. Dixon was in movies like Something of Value, A Patch of Blue, and a cult classic, Car Wash. Dixon was active in efforts to get better parts for blacks in movies and television. Hogan's Heroes was a show that had Dixon have a pioneering role as a sergeant, which became a pivotal role because at the time there weren't many blacks in a television series during the 60s. Not only was Dixon an actor, but he took up directing movies like the film The Spook Who Sat by the Door in 1973. The movie was a political drama based on a novel by a black CIA agent who becomes a revolutionary. He also directed 1972 Trouble Man. Overall, Ivan Dixon's contribution to Hollywood should be not ignored. Yes, Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte was on the top of the food chain, successful black actors. But Dixon holds his own as up there with them. Just look at his body of work. Next guy that I wrote a blog about for the upcoming issue of Gyroscope magazine for February and March was Marlon Brando. Now, Marlon Brando was arguably the greatest actor of all time. When you look at the body of work of Brando, there are a lot of reasons why. First, Brando popularized the Stanislavski system of acting. He was a cultural icon because of his roles in On the Waterfront in 1954. He won an Academy Award for that, as well as his role playing Vito Corleone in The Godfather in 1972. There were influential performances as an actor was prevalent, such as his role in A Streetcar Named Desire, Viva Zapata, Julius Caesar, The Wild One, Reflection in the Golden Eye, Last Tango in Paris, and Apocalypse Now. But what might get overlooked when you look at Marlon Brando is the fact that he was an activist as well as an actor. He was one of the first white actors that was actively involved in the civil rights movement, for example, being part of the March on Washington in 1963, or supporting the Black Panther Party. He was also an activist for the Native Americans, such as the various American Indian movement. He donated money to the Black Panther Party. In 1946, he supported the Zionist movement for a Jewish homeland. He supported the work of Martin Luther King. Brando was very concerned and critical of the mistreatment of Native Americans in Hollywood and how they was represented in movies. He made a speech regarding the lack of representation of Native Americans in the film industry in 1973. Overall, Marlon Brando wasn't just a great actor, but he was more than that because of his activism. His ability to speak out and take a stand as an actor, whether it was unpopular or controversial. Marlon Brando was one of them. It's getting close to the end of this 11th episode of the Mitchell Report. This is a different one. I'm just talking about my blogs that I wrote for the Gyroscope Media Group magazine. The next one that I wrote for is it already made the issue for December. It was about Claudette Colvin. She was a civil rights unsung pioneer. Now, believe it or not, before Rosa Parks, there was Claudette Colvin, who became the first person to refuse and resisting bus segregation on March 2nd, 1955. Now, the move was a precursor and preceded what Rosa Parks would do 9 months later. Most people assume that Rosa Parks was the first to not sit in the back of the bus, but according to recorded civil rights history, Claudette Colvin did it first. For a long time, black leaders in Montgomery, Alabama did not publicize the pioneering efforts that Claudette displayed on March 2nd, 1955. The reason because Claudette Colvin was pregnant and unmarried, as well as being a teenager. Given the social norms of the time, the youth of Colvin prevented leaders who were concerned and worried about using her to represent the boycott. Rosa Parks was a much older lady when she refused to sit in the back of the bus. She had a much dignified, older image to represent the boycott in Montgomery, Alabama. But that should never diminish the accomplishments of Colvin, because yes, her name is rarely mentioned in history books, but I felt it is necessary to shed light on a person who did something first. She deserved much credit as Rosa Parks for standing against bus segregation. In any walk of life, people who do something first seldom gets the credit for their contributions. But we must study our history in order to learn about what truly came before, because we don't have to wait until Black History Month to know the history or research the history. The research should be done on a daily basis, especially if you have a thirst for history. Overall, Colvin is disappointed that she has not received the recognition or accolades of like Rosa Parks, but she felt that as if she was getting her Christmas in January rather than the 25th. Now, another blog that I wrote was about a movie that came out in 1975. Because in 2015, I wrote a blog about a movie that came out in 1975 called Bucktown, 40 years later. Now, the so-called black exploitation era spread it like wildfire during the early 70s and mid-70s. There were movies like Shaft and Superfly that represented the genre of black cinema. There was one movie that was very underrated from that era called Bucktown. The movie featured two of the biggest stars in black cinema during that era. The names were Fred Williamson and Pam Grier, who headlined this movie. The movie dealt with police brutality, which is commonplace in 2015, which I wrote at the time. Fred Williamson played a character named Duke Johnson, who comes to a town to bury his brother who passed away. His brother was a bar owner who was killed after refusing to pay crooked cops for protection. After coming to Bucktown, Duke notices he needs some assistance, so he calls his friend Roy, which was played by actor Thomas Rasula. He wanted Roy and his gang to come in and help, so they decided to take over the town. But in order to gain control, Duke has to fight off Roy's gang all by himself. Bucktown featured actor Carl Weathers, who will 1 year later be known as Apollo Creed in the Rocky movies with Sylvester Stallone. The movie was released on July 2nd, 1975. Arthur Marks was the director of the movie. The budget for Bucktown was $370,000. Overall, Bucktown was a hidden gem of a movie that doesn't get much acclaim like movies that came out the same year like Mahogany and Cooley High. But Bucktown had all the main ingredients of 70s black cinema: sex, crooked cops, black gang, jive talking, pimping, drugs, and kung fu. Bucktown as a whole managed to reconfigure the chronology and intensity of the ingredients that resulted in a refreshing, intense action film. Now that will conclude the look back at my blogs that I wrote for Gyroscope Media Group Magazine. You can find them at Gyroscope Media Group Magazine. You go to www.gmgmagazine.com. If you want to check out those blogs and upcoming blogs that didn't come out yet, but will make the February-March issue. Yeah, this is a different kind of show that I wanted to do tonight. My 11th episode, man. I'm just trying to get all these episodes in to get my stuff out there. Check me out at Rashad Patterson. Rashad Mitchell at Rashad Patterson on my Twitter account. Also check me out at Rashad Mitchell's Books, where you can buy my books. Go to the website and check the books out. But you gotta visit Rashad Mitchell's Books on Facebook. My personal website is www.mrrashadmitchell.weebly.com. Again, that's www.mrrashadmitchell.weebly.com. Check it out. If you want to buy my books, go to either that website or go definitely to Rashad Mitchell's Books on Facebook. And directly, you click on the website and you go directly to my author page. I got 39 books. 9 of them are poetry. I got a lot that are hip hop books and a lot that are R&B and NFL. So I wrote different books in 4 different genres. That's how multi-dimensional I am. So we coming to the end of this 11th episode of the Mitchell Report. It's been a great time being lyrical with the poetry from Masterpiece Theater to reading all the blogs that I've written for Gyroscope Media Group Magazine. Again, most of them didn't come out yet. They will reach the new issue for February and March issue, a double issue. But I just wanted to recite it, give the history of what I did with the kind of blogs that I put together. So without further ado, this is Rashad Mitchell for this 11th episode of the Mitchell Report. I'm signing off. God bless.